In our journey through life, we often face situations and circumstances that bring anxiety and fear. With the advent of the coronavirus, we're facing one of those situations right now. But as followers of Jesus, we have a choice. We can choose to be overwhelmed by the circumstances of life, or we can choose to be overwhelmed by God. I'm reminded of a verse that is very applicable for today. It's Deuteronomy chapter 31, verse 8. The Lord is the one who goes ahead of you. He will be with you. He will not fail you or forsake you. Do not fear or be dismayed. What is so amazing about this verse is who is speaking and who is listening. You see, Moses is at the end of his life sharing these words to Joshua, who is about to take the Israelites into the land that God promised them centuries before. Now think about what stood before them. Armies and giants and great kings and fortified cities. Joshua and the Israelites stood on the east bank of the Jordan River, confused, uncertain, anxious, doubtful, and afraid. Very similar to the way many people are feeling today. Confused, uncertain, anxious, doubtful, and afraid. But the real truth of the Deuteronomy verse is this. Because of the promises of God, we can face anything that life brings. And that promise is that He will not fail us and He will not forsake us. But we struggle with this promise at times and experience what I call the Grasshopper Complex. Let me explain. In Numbers 13, we find the Israelites on the east bank of the Jordan River overlooking the land flowing with milk and honey, the promised land. But before they entered the land, Moses wanted them to do something. And in Numbers chapter 13, verses 1 through 3 and verses 17 through 20, Moses told them to do something. And let me give you the Humphreys paraphrase of this. Moses said, go check it out. Find out what life's going to be like. Is life going to be good or bad, easy or challenging? See if there are going to be any obstacles in your way, or if it's going to be full sail ahead. So God told Moses to send out 12 spies. Now, I got to thinking about this. Do you really think it made any difference to God what they saw when they went into the land? Absolutely not. You see, this is what God had promised Abraham hundreds of years earlier. This was their land. You see, this wasn't for God's benefit. It was intended to see how the people would respond when they saw what life was going to be like in the future. And it was going to be a challenge. You see, how we see life makes a difference in how we see ourselves and how we see God. So the 12 spies, they take off, they go into the land. And a little later they returned. And even though that the land is great, yes, it was milk and honey all around them, the spies came back with a split decision amongst themselves. 10 of the spies come to Moses and reported 3 things. They said, hey, they are better armed than we are. They lived in walled cities, which are going to be tough to take. And they are physically bigger than we are. Basically, they were saying this, we can't do it. They will eat us alive if we try to go there. It's better to stay in the wilderness and be fed by God. We are just grasshoppers and they are giants. But 2 of the spies, Joshua and Caleb, they said this, we can take them. God is on our side. We can do this. Well, guess what happened? Yeah, the majority report prevailed. And when the Israelites heard this, how did they respond? Well, in Numbers 14, verses 1 and 2, it says, then all the congregation lifted up their voices and cried, and the people wept that night. And all the sons of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron. And the whole congregation said to them, wouldn't it have been better had we died in the land of Egypt? Wouldn't it have been better that we just die right here in the wilderness? The people of Israel suffered from the grasshopper complex. As you face life and all the stuff that comes with it, do you suffer from the grasshopper complex? Well, maybe it's time to do a little gut check. Here are some symptoms of the grasshopper complex. See if you have any of these. First, you turn from a God-given challenge for fear that you lack the resources to tackle it. God, I can't do this. Well, you know something? You're right, you can't. But God can, and He will give you everything you need to accomplish it. Here's a second symptom. You see giants instead of seeing God. In the daily challenges of life, we tend to often diminish our estimate of God's faithfulness and power. We see a virus instead of seeing God in the midst of a battlefield filled with giants. How about this symptom? You don't believe the promises of God. How many times had God promised the Israelites that He would give them the promised land? How many times had He promised that if they believed Him for victory, they would achieve it? You see, simple faith in the promises of God always shifts the balance of power. The best example of this is in 1 Samuel 17:45, when David stood before Goliath the Philistine, and he said to him, "You come to me with a sword, a spear, and a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have taunted." And you know how that turned out, don't you? Here's another symptom. You have a doubting heart. In Numbers 14:31, it says this. The spies said, "We're not able to go. We can't do this." They could only think of reasons why they would lose instead of thinking of reasons why they might win. Could they really trust a God who kept them in the wilderness for 40 years on a diet of manna? Where is God when we really need Him? Is it too much to trust an invisible God to fight a visible battle? What do you think? The answer is no. But we do it because we doubt. John 20, verse 29 says this, "Blessed are they who do not see and yet believe." Here's another symptom. You have a distorted self-image. In Numbers 14:33, the spies said this, "We became like grasshoppers in our own sight." We see ourselves as small. You see, why should anyone who trusts God see himself as a grasshopper? There's a huge life lesson here. We can never see our fears for what they are until we see God for who He is. When we do that, facing life is not bad. We can do it. So what will be your decision? What will be your decision as you face this challenge today? Will you be a grasshopper or one who relies fully and completely on the power and promises of God? Don't turn to your weaknesses during tough times. Turn to your strength, and that's strength with a capital S. Deuteronomy chapter 20, verse 4 goes like this. "For the Lord your God is the one who goes with you to fight for you against your enemies, to save you." That's His promise for facing life, and it's also the cure for the grasshopper complex.